everybody.
How y'all doing?
Hi, audience. Oh my God, welcome to Circle CityCon. Good to see everybody. So I know it's getting late in the day and people are ready to have some delicious food later on tonight, so thanks for coming to our talk, the Network Night Watch. And our talk is about Terry Pratchett's Discworld in relation to InfoSec. So who are we? This is Munin.
You all know me as Munin. I'm that guy with the weird avatar that just doesn't show up on the tweeters, who people talk to when you never actually see most of the time. Don't worry about it. She's the one who's cool.
No, he's really cool. He's like a blacksmith and stuff. It's awesome. I work at a company called Dragos. I do differ in industrial control systems. I also punch a lot of things and fight people with swords. Yeah, and we're both giant geeks, so that's why we're here today. We're here to be giant geeks with you.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get a show of hands. How many of you have actually read any Terry Pratchett? Please, 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 please.
Oh, that's not bad.
It's not bad. All right.
So how many of you are here for the Pratchett but have no idea what InfoSec is? Okay, because if that was the case, you know, that'd be kind of awesome. But
it would be kind of awesome.
We are not that big a draw yet.
So why are we talking about a fantasy author today at an InfoSec conference other than the fact that we're giant nerds? First of all, everybody's familiar with the overuse of Art of War as a teaching tool for cybersecurity. Raise your hand if you've seen Art of War quotes in a security talk. You just saw one like 2 hours ago, so you should be raising your hands. We love you, Cryptia. Honestly, not everybody has actually read Art of War, who claims to have, or understood it, or really comprehended the lessons that it teaches in relation to information security and modern technology.
To be honest, it's usually just used for a quote mine for whatever people have to be talking about other than the Art of War. That's no fun.
But as we saw in this room, a lot of people have read Discworld. Discworld is brilliant satire. It's really got a lot of lessons about security and about modern technology in, of course, a fantasy setting. It's wonderful, dour British humor, and
about as dry as a desert, but a lot more fun.
It's pretty great. And there's a lot of great lessons in that anthology of books that we can use to apply and teach InfoSec. And that's what we want to do here today, is take some of those fun quotes in that fun fantasy environment and show you how you can relate them to teach about InfoSec and teach blue team and red team security.
And at least give you some better sources to mine from. Yeah, pep up your own presentations a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So, for those of you who have not heard of Terry Pratchett or Discworld, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, because you're going to go home and read some good books.
You're in for a lot of fun. So, well, we got the disc to start with.
It's a flat Earth.
And it's on top of 4 elephants.
Which are on top of a turtle.
That flies through space.
Makes sense, right?
Simple.
Okay, most logical thing you've heard at an information security conference, right? Okay. And
there's a lot of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. So if you don't understand why we're talking about this particular intellectual property today, it's really famous. I'm sorry if you haven't heard of it.
You're in for a treat, though.
You might have seen the movies on PBS,
or on the BBC.
Yeah, 4 decades, 41 novels, like dozens of games, video games, tabletop games, and a few movies, major motion pictures.
We've left some out. We've left some out. If you disagree with our choice of which ones to focus on, come find me in the bar later, buy me a drink, and then you can tell me what you think should have been there.
Definitely. Sadly, the author, Sir Terry Pratchett, who was knighted for his efforts in writing this massive anthology of satirical fiction books, passed away in 2015. He was a terrific nerd. He was a wonderful computer geek as well as a D&D geek, fantasy and science fiction geek. He wrote other things other than Discworld, including some books about hacking. So just a lot of fun, wonderful person.
We have a cast of characters. Don't worry if you don't recognize them all. The author himself is making a cameo here. Points if you can spot him.
So there's some characters. There's major groups of characters that comprise this anthology of books. And each of them is kind of representing some foibles in modern life. It's a satire, again, of modern life.
And basically, there's a few major groups that you can group the books into. We start with, of course, the witches. The witches. Oh, yeah, we do.
We do start with the witches.
Yes, we do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, you need your hat.
I'm much better.
Hats are important, as we will find out later on in this talk.
Yes, hats are very important.
But yes, we start with the witches. They're wonderful witches. We also have...
We have the city watch. So, of course, being a fantasy environment, there's a town, there's a big city, and it has thieves and guilds and everything you'd expect in any kind of D&D or Lord of the Rings kind of environment. And they have a very disgruntled city watch who tries to guard the city against all kinds of interesting threats. And a very, very, let's say, world-weary and eclectic commander, Sir Samuel Vimes.
Vimes is great.
Who tries to handle security in this fantasy city.
Vimes is the ultimate blue teamer, but we'll talk about that later.
We will.
We also have the anthropomorphic personification of death.
I bet you didn't plan to hear that in an InfoSec talk today. The anthropomorphic personification of death.
And he always speaks in all capital letters. And it's a good thing I've had a bad allergy this week, because otherwise...
He's going to do the death quotes. It's going to be great. Anyway.
It'll work.
Next we have the wizards, and the wizards live in ivory tower academia to an extreme. Yes, they're very talented, brilliant wizards, but they mostly care about avoiding meetings and food. And
Mostly
sometimes
lunch.
they get lost on the way to their own offices.
And then there's other people of varying levels of savoriness.
Yes.
That's a good way to put it.
Savoriness.
Most of them are...
The nice people and the people who rob them.
So
we built our fantasy world here. Again, flat Earth, riding on elephants on the back of a turtle, flying through space.
pretty standard.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so again, let's go back to why we're talking about this.
These particular characters and their foibles, the way that they interact with others, they have certain lessons that we can apply, if we choose to information security. And it's a little bit more entertaining. It gets people's interest a little bit better than this digging up old dusty Sun Tzu again.
Okay, so let's start with the blue team and lessons for those various characters in terms of defensive security.
The witches. The witches are a great bunch. Usually the ones that you run across in the Discworld books are Esme Wedwax and Nanny Ogg.
They're intense pragmatists. They're very practical. As opposed to the other outlandish fantasy characters, they're the ones who are making sure that babies are born, that goats are taken care of when they're ill. You know, they're the ones who are going from house to house clipping toenails of old men. So they're the ultimate pragmatists and the hard-working defenders.
And honestly, they have a lot of very solid understanding of psychology, in other terms.
She'd long ago been resigned to the fact that people expected a bottle of something funny colored and sticky. It wasn't the medicine that did the trick, though. It was, in a way, the spoon. Masquerade.
How many of you have had people want to buy Blinky boxes and thought that the Blinky boxes did everything for you, when really it was just that the impression of something impressive, something boffo, something fancy and shiny that did most of the work for you. We also have, you can't go around building a better world for people. Only people can build a better world, otherwise it's just a cage.
So we have an intense desire as security people, especially young security people, to take over everything that happens in our enterprise and try to build a secure enterprise. When in fact, our job is to secure a business that is doing business things with a business model and a mission statement related to how they make money, how they produce products, how they function as an organization. We are serving them. We can't create a secure environment in a box. We have to create a secure environment within all of those constraints. Otherwise, we have a maddening situation for our end users, and they'll just find ways to evade it.
It ain't about us, ultimately.
But the reward for lots of work seemed to be lots more. If you dug the biggest hole, they just gave you a bigger shovel, shepherd's crown.
Yep, the reward for a job well done is more work. There's never an end to it.
If you're really good at your job, yeah.
Well, not much more to be said about that. Oh, yeah. Good old Mrs. Arvidge. Yes, she believed in shiny wands and magical amulets and mystic runes and the power of the stars, while Granny Weatheraxe. In cups of tea, dry biscuits, washing every morning in cold water, and, well, she believed in Granny Weatheraxe.
So at the very, very most basic level of security people, we have a temptation to trust our vendors, and as he mentioned previously, those shiny boxes. We have vendors who come in with these beautiful sales pitches that say, you plug this into your network, you're going to detect all the APTs. And we know with experience that that isn't true. It takes human effort, many long hours going through logs, building signatures, tuning our IPS systems, and our own training and our confidence in ourselves to detect adversaries.
Ultimately, it is down to us. It may not be about us, but it's what we do.
It's about the human beings.
Absolutely. Good old Vimes. Vimes is, without a doubt, my favorite character in the entire corpus.
I know that one.
Oh, my bad.
I know that one, said Vimes. Who watches the watchman? Me, Mr. Pessimal. Ah, but who watches you, Your Grace? Said the inspector with a brief smile. I do that too. All the time, said Vimes. Thud. So, when it comes down to it, if you think about it, it's our users' trust in us. We have to watch ourselves. We have all this hilarious level of access to the corporate locks and keys and strong boxes. But if we aren't trusted with that, if we don't keep a close watch on ourselves to make sure that we are worthy of that trust, well, what's the point? We'd hardly be security at that point. We'd just be another group of users with pretensions. What did he think he was doing? The job, of course. The one that's in front of you. Night Watch. So in incident response, there is a great deal of triage. It's the same with a lot of different security roles where you're dealing with incidents and high-pressure situations with customers, with your fellow employees, with your management. There comes a point where you're exhausted and you're working on things at 2 in the morning when you've been working on a CTF and you're intensely frustrated, or you've got 7 different things running at work when you're auditing something where you don't know how you're going to cope. And really what it comes down to is your training and your drilling of your activities in advance. So that when you're really exhausted and you're stressed out and you're in a total panic mode, you're able to think about, this is step 1. This is my playbook. This is what I do first. This is what I do second. This is what I do third. I do the job. I'm not going to panic about it. I know my tasks, and I'm going to progress through them in a logical order because I've trained and I've trained and I've trained for this. The worst thing that you can do is nothing. Snuff.
We have a job to do. We can't just shine it on and let it wait until tomorrow. Security is something that needs to be done, and it needs to be done expeditiously. So even if we aren't sure of the exact correct course of action to take, we should do something to make it at least a little better. Now we've got the wizards, which is...
The wizards, oh yes.
Bureaucracy incarnated.
They are a total
mess.
Mockery of bureaucracy and of the problems in academia. The good things too, but a lot of it is very strong satire in terms of the problems in universities, how hard it is to be a researcher, how hard it is to be an educator, and the challenges that come up in that. Because they are so caught up in their ivory tower to an extreme.
Some questions should not be asked. However, someone always does. How does it work? Said Chancellor Mustrom Ridcully, the master of the unseen university. This was the kind of question that Ponders Stibbons hated almost as much as, how much will it cost? They were 2 of the hardest questions a researcher ever had to face. That would be from the Science of Discworld, number 4.
Who has ever been asked one of those 2 questions as part of their job? How much does it cost? And how does it work? Especially by somebody who's not particularly technical.
And keep your hands up if you like those questions.
Exactly. It's a challenging part of our job, again, to recognize that we're part of a business. And we come to these conferences and we're surrounded by security, technical work, CTFs, new exploits, new research. And then we go back to our business and we're caught up in what's our budget this year? Are we going to have to hire new people? How are we going to hire them? How are we going to train them? How are we going to implement this project which is being resisted by our finance department? And it's just an unfortunate reality we have to wrap our heads around. I mean, we love doing the sexy, fun, technical stuff that's part of computer hacking. We love thinking through those challenges, but sometimes we have to think about the responses to those two questions that we're going to have to give to our management, to our leadership, to our customers, in a way that they can comprehend, not in just a way that we can understand as technical people. So that's an innate part of our job, and it's something that, while it's uncomfortable to us sometimes, we have to accept.
It's called accountability, not a funability.
A funability. I love it. Rid Cully scratched his ear. The man was right, of course. You had to have some of the buggers around, and there was no getting away from it. Personally, he avoided them whenever possible, as did the rest of the faculty, occasionally running the other way or hiding behind doors whenever they saw him. Soul music, in reference to students.
Originally in reference to students, but I'm pretty sure all of us have felt that way about users at least once. Unfortunately, well, you have to have them around, otherwise what is there to secure? Not much.
We have no purpose without our end users and the businesses that we are supporting and securing.
Much as we would really prefer not to deal with them sometimes, they are the job.
That's our job.
Death.
On to death. You
Let
can
me
get
down
your
here.
death voice ready. Maybe you should go ahead and read the first death quote.
What can the harvest hope for, if not for the care of the Reaper Man?
Wow, that was really good. That was really scary as a good death voice.
It's only because I've had this allergy.
I'm so glad you're having an allergy. No, I'm not. Feel better. So anyway, that's kind of an oddball quote to think about, but in reference to this, it's Death is a very misunderstood character in the Discworld books. He is a pretty decent guy who's just doing a 9-to-5. Well, a 24/7 by infinity, but same difference. And he has friends, he has family.
He has the duty.
Yes, he has a very nice horse. But he's very misunderstood in that he's doing this job that nobody wants him to do. And he's there and everybody dislikes him because he's the one who interrupts their fun. Who's ever had an experience like that in InfoSec? You've been the person who's had to interrupt somebody's fun. You've had to block a website. You've had to tell people, no, you can't install that program. And they're like, oh, security, we hate you. You know, like, I hope at least a few of you have been through that because I certainly have.
But bringing things to an end is part of our necessary function. It's the duty. It's what we must do. We are there because we care about them.
Yes, and we really need to express that to our end users too, that yes, you think that we're vile and awful because we're telling you no, but please understand this is why we're doing it. We have a responsibility to secure the environment. And we have the peril of being totally misunderstood in technical environments too, because we're the ones who tell people no. That's one of the important reasons for us to network and connect well with our end users. The auditors fluttered anxiously, and as always happens in their species, when something goes radically wrong and needs fixing instantly, they settle down to try to work out who is to blame. Hogfather.
So the auditors in Discworld are in and of themselves a sort of supernatural force and are entirely external to how everything else works. The parallels with more standard auditors should be fairly obvious.
They were very obvious to Pratchett, I think.
But this particular quote is more about, well, blame. I mean, who hasn't felt at least the urge to point the finger at someone, this is your fault. This is your fault. This is your fault. Although, not to get too aphoristic, but every time you point a finger, you've got at least 3 many pointed back at you.
And that's what's deeply flawed about the auditors in the Discworld books, is their eventual undoing is that they are deeply flawed, and they are so caught up in whose fault is each problem that they, and trying to make things utterly perfect that they're unable to do their job, and they disappear from existence because they can no longer properly audit.
If you put a large switch in a cave somewhere with a sign on it saying "End of the world switch, please do not touch," the paint wouldn't even have time to dry.
It's true.
It's from Thief of Time.
It's very true. And in fact, in that book, there is a large switch on the wall that says, "Please do not touch." And yes, somebody presses it. But anyway, there is a real problem with alert fatigue in our industry. We give users tons of prompts. We give them UAC prompts. We give them Bit9 prompts. We give them antivirus prompts. We give them Carbon Black prompts. We give them prompts for everything. Our patch management systems.
Don't open the attachment.
We keep telling them things like that, and we keep giving them yes/no boxes, and eventually to get their jobs done, to go back to that business functionality, they just start hitting yes to things. Even when it says, "Do you want to infect your computer?" they're still going to click yes because they're so incredibly trained and so frustrated with our operations and security. So that's something, it's a point of caution. We have to be really careful to, again, build those good relationships with our end users to try to avoid that.
The important thing, she decided, was to stay calm. There was always a logical explanation for everything, even if you had to make it up.
So in incident response, again, we come back to that triage concept of we're working in very high pressure, long hour situations where things are stressful and we're exhausted. And
people want an answer right
now.
now.
We need an answer right now. Or it's your job, or your life. And the best thing you can do is stay calm. Keep in mind that there's always an answer, even if you don't see it right away when you're doing your hunting, you're doing your triaging, you're doing your incident response, and you're timelining out and trying to find that initial point to pivot off of.
Even if the answer is just close enough.
You start somewhere, and there will be a logical answer, so stay calm and keep looking for that initial point to start, and then start looking for evidence, looking for evidence, looking for evidence, looking for, if you're on the red team, start looking for, the next point you're going to pivot to, the next way you're going to move laterally. There's always going to be somewhere to move to. Stay calm and be logical. Algebra, said Madame Fraut. But that's far too difficult for 7-year-olds. Yes, but I didn't tell them that, and so far they haven't found out, said Susan, Thief of Time.
So, how many people have had someone come up to them and say, "I'm just not good with computers," and they've given up? This is the opposite of that. If you don't tell people that something is complicated, something is sophisticated, maybe they won't catch on until they've already learned it. It does work sometimes. I've seen it work. I have, in fact, tricked some people into learning things in the past. And
people are smarter than we know, and then sometimes they're smarter than they know.
They're almost always smarter than they know, if you keep what they know out of it.
Good point. All right, so let's move on to the other citizens of Ankh-Morpork and the Discworld.
You want to start, or shall I?
Sometimes the truth is arrived at by adding all the little lies together and deducing them from the totality of what is known. Going postal.
Kind of an inverse of the famous Sherlock Holmes quote, which is so cliche I won't mention it right now. Going Postal, by the way, is one of the books that everyone thinks of as the hacking book in Discworld. This is pretty much going to be the only mention you see of it.
If you start with a Discworld book, it's a great one to start with because it's all about social engineering and hacking.
Right, it's wonderful. But anyway, you don't necessarily have to start out with completely accurate information. If you put everything you have together, sometimes you can see a common thread. And it may lead you to what the actual answer genuinely is once you're down to it. Headquarters had even started an Employee of the Month scheme to show how much they cared. That was how much they didn't care.
All right, so I assume that a large number of us have worked for megalithic corporations and large organizations. It can be a hard nut to crack, working for one of those companies and having wonderful technical skills and a wonderful community here, and then moving into an environment where you feel like nobody actually cares about what you're doing. And all I can tell you about that after years of experience is try to find those small communities and try to make an effort and make things better for the people around you. You can't necessarily be the star employee of your company, and it doesn't really matter much or mean much necessarily if they call you the star employee. What matters is that you're making a good impact on the company, and you're making, more importantly, a good impact on the people who you interface with on a daily basis. He was a responsible authority, and people could use terms like core values at him with impunity, making money.
So whenever you end up in an organization that you stick with for some time, you become a part of that organization, and people will throw phrases like that at you at some point, and that's when you know you've become thoroughly ossified into the business. You really have two choices at that point. You can run away screaming and become a consultant, or you can
Who's
stick
run
with
away
it.
screaming and become a consultant? People are
More than
raising
one
their
hand.
hands.
Or you can stick with it, except that people are going to throw horrible phrases like that at you on a regular basis, and learn how to be management of a sort.
And learn how to help the people around you again, instead of worrying about those relatively minor things that are part of working for a big organization. All right, so we're going to move on to lessons for the red team. Yeah. All right. So we move back to the witches.
Ah, you do have a brain after all. Of course it is. Boffo. Yes, a good name for it. Boffo, indeed, the art of expectations. Show people what they want to see. Show them what they think should be there. I have a reputation to keep up, after all. A Wintersmith.
So a lovely part of the witches, again, is their ability to socially engineer people and maneuver people how they need to be maneuvered to make them better when they're sick or they're getting themselves injured, or to help them make practical life decisions. And so much of what they do has nothing to do with magic. A lot of it is just midwifery and care for the elderly and, fixing injuries. They are the pragmatic fixers of and defenders of society, common society. And something that a lot of them recognize is the need for something they term boffo. Has anybody heard the term boffo before, other than the candy?
How many of you have heard pretexting? It's the same thing.
Okay. So the concept of boffo is that if I put a scary-looking skull on my desk and it's from, the novelty store down the street, people are going to get a certain impression of me, right? If I outfit my whole room in black and I wear this hat and I put some spooky music on, some theremin stuff, and people are going to come in there and they're either going to be like, "What's wrong with you? This is hilarious," or they're going to be like, "You're kind of creepy."
If I show up in a hard hat with a clipboard, no one on the job site is going to come anywhere near me.
Exactly. So boffo is not necessarily functional props, but things that influence people's perception of you. Things that actually perform no practical function, but you use to influence the way people perceive you. So, as he says, in a social engineering engagement, that could be a clipboard. It could be the way you dress. If I'm wearing this dress into a business, people are going to treat me much differently than if I come in wearing jeans and a raggedy t-shirt, or if I come in wearing a work uniform. If I show up in a military uniform, people are their impression of me and how they relate to me is going to change drastically, and I'm the same person. All I'm doing is changing my clothes.
It's the story they have in their head for that outfit that they then apply to you.
Every trade, every craft had its hat. That's why kings had hats. Take the crown off a king, and all you had was someone good at having a weak chin and waving to people. Hats had power. Hats were important. Witches abroad.
Which is more of an extension of the previous concept, but as a personal note, people don't know me without a hat. It's weird, but people won't recognize me without a hat. They expect to see the hat when they expect to see me. It's a strange concept. By hats and the other accoutrements of your particular role play, in and of themselves, an important role in establishing who you are to people and why you're there.
So again, in social engineering and pen testing, And this can be digital and physical. If you present yourself as a marketing person from another company and you do it well, people are going to interact with you in a certain way. If you're sending a phishing email, they're going to interact with you in yet another way if you present yourself as a CFO of a company.
And if you send an email from whatsup@gmail, it's going to be received a lot differently than johnsmith@corpco.com.
So understand what your hat is and how it's reflected in the way that you interact with people.
For example, when an obvious innocent sits down with 3 experienced card sharpers and says, "How do you play this game then?" someone is about to be shaken down until their teeth fall out.
I love this scene. It's probably one of the best social engineering scenes in Discworld. Granny Weatherwax is a very serious, pragmatic witch, but at one point in the books, they're totally out of money during their travels. Her friends have been tricked out of all their money by card sharps and being scammed, cards up the sleeve, whatever. And she goes in and she plays a game of cards to get all their stuff back, and she wins. First of all, because she sees through all the tricks that they're playing, and second of all, because she's a wonderful social engineer. She's incredibly good at making herself, instead of like a regal witch, look like a feeble old lady. So she comes in and she acts like a doddering old lady, and she says, "Oh, would you teach me how to play cards, dearie?" And she presents herself as incompetent and weak and feeble and old, and she takes them for everything they're worth. She takes all their money, and she and her friends end up having to flee the train because they're going to get chased down by these angry card sharps. But it's a lovely scene, and it's a really terrific example of social engineering. But there's an obvious lesson here for red teamers. Don't be afraid to portray yourself as weaker or less competent than you are. I know from personal experience doing red team engagements, if I act meek, it's unfortunate, and I carry a few coffees, I can get pretty much through any door, If I'm just the shy, wearing kind of dumpy, frumpy clothes, and I've got my coffees in my hand, people let me in anywhere. That's not a gender-specific thing, Act nice, act meek or inexperienced, and people will be happy to show you around and show you up because they think they're better than you.
If you're weak, you're not a threat, and thus
Exactly.
you aren't evaluated as one.
An assassin, a real assassin, had to look like one. Black clothes, hood, boots, and all. If they could wear any clothes, any disguise, then what could anyone do but spend all day in a small room with a loaded crossbow pointed at the door? Night watch.
And this is why Red Team is always complaining about those scope things. Because nobody really wants to have to deal with what amounts to a dedicated threat with any arbitrary surface. They want to have at least some chance of, it's going to be along these lines. So if you're going to have a paid assassin come after you, it would be best that you could recognize that it's going to happen and perhaps even some of the circumstances of it happening.
But as you're learning as a blue team, it's better to have a scoped engagement because otherwise you are going to be cowering in the room with the crossbow, because before you've done any tuning, before you've had any experience in being a blue team, which is arguably not a great time to have a pen test, but based on your experience level, you want to have a scope that's appropriate for that experience so you actually get something out of the pen test. If you have somebody come in black box and say, use your best APT simulators to break into our environment, they're going to break in. You want to do the best you can at the skill level you are at right now, because we're all on the same team and we're all trying to secure the environment.
But no one thinks anyone is really going to try to steal the scone. Would you try to tell me that 4 guards sitting in that little guardhouse on a 12-hour shift will be alert all the time? That's enough for a hand of poker. The 5th elephant.
So this is a point in time where Commander Vimes is evaluating the security around a very precious royal item. And he looks at the security theater. And of course, we've all dealt with security theater in our daily lives and in our lives in security. And he sees that there's a bunch of guards sitting around the thing that's being secured. And he's like, There's 4 guards who have seats there, and they can chill out, and they can probably play cards when nobody's looking. There's just enough people who they can have a conversation, they can have a meal. It's security theater. Nobody's actually being secured by this. So something you have to recognize as a good offensive security person, a good red teamer, is to notice when things are the portrayal of security rather than effective security. Sometimes effective security is a silent security you don't see. It's not the things that you see overtly right away. And that's a gotcha for a lot of security people because they look for the obvious detection and the obvious sensors, and they see that and they totally miss the more subtle detection that is in place in an environment. So be able to recognize security theater and it as a deterrent versus actual detection. People who used, this is the wizards, we're on to the wizards, so we're back into academia. People who use magic without knowing what they're doing usually came to a sticky end, all over the entire room, sometimes. Moving pictures.
So how many people have heard of some kid who just goes and grabs Kali and starts hacking?
Nobody. Nobody's ever heard of somebody just like going out there with Metasploit and screwing something up. Wow, you guys have really talented friends. Wow. So it does happen.
It does happen, and you really need to know what your tools do before you do them with the tools. There's going to be side effects of various kinds. You might end up DDoSing a production network by accident. You might accidentally nmap some kind of IDS network, and that always turns out well.
I shut down all of iCloud.
Well, there you go. A sticky end all over the room. Case in point. The bringer of bad news is never popular, especially when it's on an empty plate. Unseen academicals.
Yeah, we're back to that business methodology again. I always seem to get those ones. So, part of working in any organization of any size is everybody can get breached. Everybody's vulnerable to getting breached, no matter how secure you are, no matter how well prepared and well trained you are. Somebody can compromise your network, whether it's due to a contractor or some vendor device you would never really spent the time to scope, or even an ODA in something like a more advanced actor, or nation state, or whatever. Everybody's vulnerable to that. So you're going to have a bad day in your career in security, especially if you're blue team. If you're red team too, and you have to go to your customer and say, here's all the things that I found on your network that are vulnerable. You have to learn how to present that news, because a lot of us are tempted to, especially as red teamers, build this amazing report of all the things that we owned. Like, I found XYZ, I found 50 vulnerabilities in this server, and I was able to exploit 3 of them, and I was able to find vulnerable firmware on these devices, and you build out this great list, and you feel like you've accomplished so much, and you're going to present it to the customer.
And then the client hates you.
They hate you because you've just told them that they're doing a terrible job. That's terrible PR. That's a terrible way to relate to people. Yes, you need to provide that information, but at the same time, don't serve it on an empty plate. Don't be like, haha, I owned your network. That's not how you approach that as a professional. Again, everybody's on the same team. Red team and blue team are on the same team. You're trying to secure a network. You're not trying to go look at all the hacking I did in your network. LOL, you suck. That's not the point. So try to make it palatable. Definitely tell them about everything that you found, but do it in a way that's constructive. Say, this is how you're going to fix this. This is good that you have upgraded all your systems past 2008 server, but you still need to patch for the last 6 months. So you're making progress, but...
We didn't get in over here where we got in last time.
Yeah.
That's important to
know. Show progress. Make your feedback constructive. Don't bear bad news on an empty plate. Don't be like, here's all the things that you did that suck. Because it's not going to go over well for you. It's not going to go over well for them. They're not going to want to have you back. You're not going to be able to help them again. There are those who say that sherry should not be drunk early in the morning. They are wrong. Unseen academicals.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. That's all there is to be said about that one. Okay, we'll have to play this one off.
Yes.
Go ahead.
You can't give her that, she screamed. It's not safe.
It's a sword. said the Hogfather. They're not meant to be safe.
She's a child, shouted Crumley.
It's educational.
What if she cuts herself?
That will be an important lesson. So death is substituting for the Father Christmas-like Hogfather in this particular book. And I don't know, I kind of look at educational malware like that. There's a lot of various neutered or less neutered viruses and Trojans and stuff wandering around. Yes, they are dangerous. But if you go and do something foolish with them and own yourself quite thoroughly, that will teach you quite a few very valuable lessons, and sometimes that is the way to learn those lessons.
And on the educational side, when we're dealing with end users as red team or blue team, again, they're not all stupid. They can learn things. We want to do it in a safe environment. Don't necessarily hand them a sword, but let them learn about malicious things, understand what they are, let them make mistakes and explain to them reasonably and courteously what they did wrong. Try to educate them. Try to let them learn a lesson when they make a mistake instead of going, you're wrong, one demerit, you're fired. You know, that's not the point. We want to try to educate people. And we live in a dangerous world in InfoSec. People's credit card, who's had their credit card stolen in the last couple of years? I mean, it happens to everybody. And we shouldn't be, again, it's not a demerit system. We're not going like, you suck. We don't want you in our employment anymore. It should be a learning experience every time, and it should be constructive, and it should be polite.
Am I really a bastard? Or am I just really good at thinking like one, making money?
Who's ever asked himself that question especially red teamers? And it really is important to understand that distinction. You're going to have some time in your career when you're doing red teaming and you're doing offensive engagements, you're going to have that moment when you're like, hold on a second, I'm getting really gleeful about like honing this environment. That's not the point of this. Like, you do need to have that introspection every so often and say, okay, I am enjoying this and I'm glad that I enjoy my work, but am I still being constructive? Am I still doing something that's useful to security? Because a lot of things we do are robbing people, taking their stuff. Like, that's our job. We're doing it under contract and with disclaimers, and we're simulating a lot of things, but we're still going through the motions of robbing people, taking their money, taking their stuff. And you can get really caught up on that. He'd forgotten the ancient wisdom. Take care when you are closely observing that you are not closely observed, making money.
So this is one of those situations where if you're breaking in someplace, are you sure that what you're doing is not being observed? Are your tools, techniques, and procedures making their way out to hands that shouldn't have them at that particular point in time? Or, importantly, are the back doors that you're installing in a client's system secured so that some other guy, Russia, China, Mongolia, East,
who cares?
Whatever, is themselves going to take advantage of what you've just put there? It's a very important lesson to keep in mind that people are watching, who's watching, and how are they watching.
And when you forget to update your pen testing box, and you're sticking it on people's networks.
And speaking of which, a weapon you held and didn't know how to use belonged to your enemy.
And this goes for blue team with sensors, IDSs. Vulnerability scanners are a huge one that advanced adversaries love to own because, hey, I have all your vulnerability scans, and now I have a point to pivot off of that has permissions on your computers.
SIM boxes with external network connections and weak credentials.
But it goes for red team, too, in terms of offensive computing. Do you honestly go in there and patch your VMs? How often are you patching your VMs that you're doing on-site engagements with? Are they vulnerable? What can you do with them? What could the blue team or a adversary who's actually compromising the network do with your point of presence? So you have a risk from the blue team there, and you have a risk from external adversaries that are actually trying to do damage. The wonderful thing about the golden suit and the hat with wings was that if Moist took them off, he wasn't him anymore. He was just a nondescript person in unmemorable clothes, and had a face you'd vaguely think you'd seen before, going postal.
So this is, on one hand, kind of the corollary of the importance of hats from earlier, but also, on the other hand, this is a job. This is not, for many folks, a whole lifetime of constant inspection and cracking things. No, you can have this as just a job. You can take off your hat when you get home, sit down and do whatever. You can be not the act all the time. There's other things in the world. Try them out.
In summary, Art of War is awesome. It's amazing. And I know there's going to be people on Twitter like railing on me later, like, Art of War is awesome. And yes, Art of War is a phenomenal piece of work. And it's a wonderful way to talk about military and strategic engagements. It's useful in a lot of contexts to explain things. However,
it's used, overused, way overused, cliched, corrupted, said backwards, quote mined, dusty as all hell. It was written in like the year, 350 or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Guys, there are other books.
So we have a lot of geeky intellectual properties out there, and a lot of them are very, very smart. Another one that comes to mind is Hitchhiker's Guide. I could do this same talk with the Douglas Adams books.
Easily, in
yeah.
a heartbeat.
And I bet you can think of some too. There's very smart, very sardonic, satirical pieces of intellectual property out there that have great lessons for InfoSec. And we should be using them to teach these lessons to young people and to people who aren't in our industry. They're wonderful tools, and not everything has to be the pinnacle of the ivory tower with Out of War.
They're fun to read.
They're very fun to read. So I hope that some of you go out and buy a Pratchett book or listen to it on Audible on your way home or something.
Absolutely.
So that's all we have. I'm Hacks for Pancakes.
And I'm Munin.
If questions, comments, anybody want to chat about Pratchett? Nope. They don't have any comments about Pratchett. That's okay.
That's
we
fine.
love you anyway. Have fun at the con.
Great to see y'all.